views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Open BXRx, BronxNet's special coverage providing you the latest information that matters to you during COVID-19, the coronavirus, and now through civil unrest and social justice actions taking place nationwide and here in the Bronx. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Tuesday, June 16th. Coming up, the founder of La Sala Talks joins us to discuss colorism and racism among the Dominican community, a conversation that sparked after a controversial viral video on Twitter. Then, what is an elected civilians review board, and how are they proposing to stop police violence in New York City? Find out more later on. After that, we'll learn about Communities United for Police Reform's Change the NYPD campaign and their hashtag SaferNY And BxRebirth joins us to discuss Black maternal mortality and how they're helping birthers in the Bronx through COVID-19 and civil unrest. So please, stay tuned. Open BXRx starts now. Welcome to Open BXRx on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, inviting you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Recent racial tensions have sparked a conversation on racial identity and colorism amongst Caribbean cultures, including Dominicans in the diaspora and in the Dominican Republic. Here now to discuss this and more is Edwin Rosario Mazara, founder of La Sala Talks and Spanglish Voces. Thank you for joining us, Edwin.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. The first thing I want to learn about are your platforms, La Sala Talks and Spanglish Voces. Can you tell us a little bit about both?
Sure. So La Sala Talks is a YouTube channel. We started this about 2 years ago. And the intent of it was to build community through our local talents, activists, artists, all in a way that we could promote and invite people to reflect upon serious discussion and also to promote that critical thinking that's much needed in these type of spaces. It's a hard job, but we weren't intending getting likes or just being famous on video, going viral. So we understood it was going to be a tough challenge. Spanglish Voices is La Prima, a little bit of Spanglish there. That's our new project. That's our baby. It's actually a week. Well, it's been officially on site for a week. But the project is pretty much about 2 years old as well. It's just that in the making, it took a little bit longer because it's a digital magazine.
Got it.
And it's also a platform for all these writers, Latinx, not only Latinx, also African-American writers, any writers that wish to chime in into what it is, the Spanglish culture, because it's no longer ours. It's getting a little bit to that point where it's going to be a little bit mainstream almost. So it's definitely something that was needed because we don't have that. We don't have a platform that gives voices to those type of writers. Now, having said that, it's not that we invite people to only write in Spanglish. The platform is open to those who want to write in English, Spanish, or Spanglish, all three. And of course, it links also to what we do with La Sala Talks, local talents, promoting critical thinking, serious discussion. And also we have fun doing it. It's not like we present these serious discussion and we get all, or educating you and all of that. No. We invite people to their opinion, always in a way that it could always promote these much needed discussions like the one we're having today.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Evelyn, for sharing. So speaking of serious discussions, let's get right into it. In regards to Dominicans and racial identity and stigmas that we are faced with in our culture, can you just tell me about a little bit of background regarding this and the complexities behind these conversations and discussions?
Yeah, so a lot of people, when it comes to this discussion, a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, the newer generation is actually, well, let me rephrase that, because there seems to be a misconception that the newer generation, our generation, and the generation after mine's, and when I say our, I'm not inviting you to, because I might be a little bit older than you, We think that we hold the truth and the vanguard in this type of discussion. There's been people doing this since the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, but there was no social media platform, and they were much more dangerous time. And of course, they were a smaller number. So they kind of laid the foundation and the groundwork for us today to continue building on this type of discussion. And if you want to call it movement as well. But there is a misconception that it started with Trujillo.
Yeah.
Trujillo added to something that was already there. This, and I'm not going to go all the way back to, Christopher Columbus and the slavery, because we all know that story. But there is something important that when you look at the first revolt in 1521, which was the first slave revolt, that was not successful, but it was the first one, and it was quelled by the Spaniards. They pretty much install a law, and this is when it becomes institutionalized within the Caribbean, a law that stripped any Black body of any rights, because they fear that there will be in the future, as they was, later on, another slave revolt, which then, of course, happened in 1804. And then we have Haiti, which is the birth of the first free nation of Black slaves. So, of course, after that, then you have this buildup of international condemnation because of this revolt, and because we have Black bodies who are free, because it was a bad example, the United States and everybody else who held this type of environment and held slaves, because it was also an economic system as well. So this is when that narrative starts building of anti-Black, anti-Blackness. Blacks is bad. When you look in the dictionary, Black is dark and grim. So it's pretty much installed in our language, in our textbooks, everything. Now, when you move forward into the era before Trujillo, we already had a lot of Dominican intellectuals who were very fond of their quote unquote Spaniards link, who started to build this narrative, which is the narrative that's predominant today. Within their writings, within their texts, within their books, they started to build that discourse that would criminalize anyone just for being Black, just for existing as a Black person. So this then became a political discourse with Trujillo. And I'm not mentioning names or everything like that, because it's pretty extensive. If I start mentioning the names of all the intellects and everybody, we're gonna have a 6-hour discussion, and I know we don't have that time. So that's why I'm just jumping within the important time frames. So when we get Trujillo, then he pushes this narrative through political discourse, and it becomes institutionalized as well. And then, of course, we all know about the murders of 23,000, 25,000, 26,000 Haitians as a means to blanquear la República Dominicana.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to whiten the Dominican Republic. Now, mind you, Trujillo had Haitian grandparents. So it becomes one of those things where you have, the self-hate comes from all this narrative that was already built before. He then manifests that as a tyrant, a dictator onto the society. Society builds upon that. Because we have two different nations in one island, product of colonialism, of course, you will have this back and forth between the difference within cultures. Now, even the quote unquote independence that we celebrate, or I don't say we, Dominicans celebrate on February 27th, there was no revolt and there was no independence. It was a separation between two cultures within one island. It's as if tomorrow Florida wanted to separate. It separated. There wasn't a revolution. So within that, there was an act that was enacted, and I believe it was 1821. I have it somewhere around here, where due to that separation, there was an agreement between both nations, because they share the same territory, to have this free path to transition from one place to another through commerce and jobs. Now, it's pretty funny that nowadays you want to call people illegal when it's stipulated in an act within the Constitution as well. So this is why with Trujillo and all of that comes this effort to criminalize that type of flow, so they could keep, quote unquote, the Black people out, and we could keep our Spanish culture on our side. So it gets ingrained into the conversation. And this is why you have today, even grandparents of us will say things like, que el haitiano come niños and all of that. It's because this was already built into a narrative to intellectuals with a false story about a murder of a young girl and her family, which was done by Spaniards. They were Gitanos, but it was blamed on the Haitians. And it was used as a political tool. It's pretty much the same thing you see here when you see the current administration say that Mexicans steal, they rob, they're bringing drugs. It's used as a current to prop up, confusion, soul hate, because there is two things that always motivates people to in the most primitive way, which is the whole thing with nationalism and this whole thing with fear. When they tell you that your jobs, your money, your culture, your daughters, your wife are going to be stolen by these black bodies, no education behind why they're doing this, it builds that harmful narrative. So that, that has created the stigmas to which, and it's funny because you hear people say, "Y es haitiano," but it's a way of saying this black person.
Yeah.
And that's where that gray line is too, where they don't, some people are not even that, they're unconsciously reflecting these biases, these prejudices, but it's because the language is so coded as well that they don't understand what they're doing when they say these things as well.
Right. Let's talk about that, Edwin. So like the diaspora right now with what's going on, the national protests and all the things for Black Lives Matter, all the movements that are going on. We come into as immigrants to America, right? Where, for instance, in Washington Heights, what happened recently with a stereotype that happened, it was a misunderstanding. But I just want to like unpack that a little bit. It was a misunderstanding because apparently the story is that a group of Dominicans saw a group of black men and they assumed that they were there to loot. Later on, they discovered that they were not there to loot. And now what does that tell us about what we're learning as the next generation and the importance of this race dialogue in our households?
Yeah, so that actually occurred in Inwood. It was on Dykeman, not on Washington Heights. It's pretty much we're linked together. I was raised in Inwood and I lived down in Washington Heights. It's pretty much one neighborhood. The whole thing came about, and this is why language matters, because it does invite certain biases and prejudices to sneak in and take over the narrative. The original intent, although, and I wrote a statement about that on my social media platforms, talking about that. The original intent of some of those kids who were at the forefront of that, not the ones who came afterwards and did the act that you're talking about, which I'm going to touch about too, in which in no way I defend, I condemn very sternly as well, was created by the same narrative that's going on in the news, especially specifically Spanish news, Univision, Telemundo, all these things, where they were portraying and they were confusing people, where they were drawing this gray line where no longer people knew what the protest was about, and they were just associating it with looting, which is a textbook, it's textbook. It's always been done when there's protests. They always try to delegitimize any protest by associating it with looters, and we know the history of that. Some of the looters are not even part of the protest. Some are infiltrated. Some are just kids who are product of the system as well. You live in poverty, and this is poverty, the only way you know how to react, because this is the only thing that you know. So quickly, the narrative became, because we're talking about Black Lives Matter, again, it falls on Dominicans of the older generation being disconnected with the fact that we are Black. They don't say we're Black, they say, I'm Dominican, I'm not Black. Into associating anyone who is African-American with the looting. Yet the looting that was done in Fordham was basically done with kids from everywhere, because you can see the videos, Now the kids organized supposedly some type of little gathering to protect the businesses, because through social media, I don't know who posted it or where it came from, but supposedly there was something roaming around stating that there was going to be some looting done on Dykeman, which if you visited Dykeman, or anyone who has visited Dykeman knows there's a lot of restaurants there. It's there's a little strip down there as well, and all of that. So that was the original intent. The original intent was to quote unquote, supposedly defend these small businesses from their community from getting looted by anyone who went out there to do that. Now, the problem with that is that it invites for the type of prejudice and implicit bias that came about afterwards. And this is why these type of discussions are important, because people started to confabulate the protests with just destroying property. And then destroying property became the narrative And then they forgot about the fact that, a human being was killed due to structural racism. So the media did their job in that part, sensationalizing the looting and making it about that and taking the focus away from that. And these kids also fell into that trap because most of them are not as politicized, are not as socially aware. And again, they had good intents and their heart might have been at a good place, but the fact that they didn't understand and they weren't aware of what the narrative was and what they were doing by adding to that narrative gave way then to the unfortunate incident that happened afterwards when a few young African Americans, I don't know where, I guess they were coming from the protest that was done in Harlem earlier that day, because there was a protest in Harlem on that day. The fact was that they were coming from the train station, the one train on Nagel walking up Dykeman. And that led to a quote unquote interaction between that group and the other group, because one group thought they were on looting, the other group, of course, they had to defend themselves, they got defensive. And then they were chased down and the video was posted on social media. And then it built another narrative, which is the one that I also want to get away from, because I don't want to fall into those games of where every Dominican is racist. Yeah. And there's a problem with that. We have to start to use the language that says that there is racism in the Dominican culture. And then that helps open up the dialogue, because people will get defensive and they will close themselves to any type of discussion. So yeah, that's what occurred that night. The next day, those kids that were chased were sought out, and then they met the kids who did the chasing. They spoke, they cleared the air, and then they understood. The ones who did the chasing understood that they were wrong. It's a good thing, because it also shows that when we held them accountable, we called them out, and that also obligated them to start to reflect and think about this as well.
Right.
But again, it's unfortunate, because then it added again to creating that great area and taking away from the core message, which is Black Lives Matter, and not Dominicans are racist or Dominicans in Washington Heights are racist and all of that. Because, anything that takes away from that attention, it's not really helping the cause. We know we have these issues and we have to deal with them. But right now, those issues are part of that bigger issue that we're trying to face now as well. And by facing the bigger issue, we'll take care of that one as well.
Right. And there are a lot of Dominicans engaging in these conversations already. For instance, I identify as Afro-Dominican, like many other Dominicans. But for those who may not know, what does it mean to be Afro-Dominican?
So and that's a good question, because there is something of an individual choice in that. So I could speak for myself as an individual of how I feel to be an African-Dominican. I cannot speak for everyone else who feels that. Because again, there are even those who claim to be African-Dominican still hold a lot of biases and self-hate that they portray in others as well. So this is why the discussion it's a very deep discussion, and it's well-rounded, because it has a lot of layers. But for me, what being African-Dominican means is finding self-identity, self-love, finding the truth, learning about your past, overcoming self-hate, most importantly. But then you learn from the past to build a better future. Because that's where a lot of people get lost in the translation of these things. Then you become this hardcore militant, and then you criticize someone else because they're not either Black enough, or because their hair is not Afro enough, or because their hair is not curly enough. And that's not the dialogue. I mean, you're not helping with that, But again, it is self-awareness. It is understanding your past. It is understanding the years and years of trying to erase Black bodies. It is discovering your true culture. It is celebrating your ancestors. It's embracing them. It's embracing yourself. It's embracing others. It's embracing your family. And it's also helping deconstruct a narrative that's been imposed on you that not only hurted you as an individual, and this is why it's important to invite people to talk about it as an individual and tell their individual stories, because it does add to the discussion when we speak as a collective, as opposed to you imposing your individual experience to the collective. I don't know if that makes sense, or if you understood what I was trying to say there.
It does.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It does, and I'll take that definition because I can attest to that, and I feel like that's how I express myself as an AfroDominican for sure. I wish that we had more time to discuss, but I do want to wrap up with just learning how we can unlearn, how we can start to unlearn, unpack, and open our families to these type of dialogues to dismantle oppressive behaviors and discrimination within our communities.
It's very easy. Conversations, facts, and historical facts. When you're going to have these dialogues and these conversations, you also have to be willing to back them up with facts, because this is the only way you're going to make someone understand. And also sharing your individual experience. If you're going to talk to your parents, well, let them know how you felt discriminated at work, how you felt discriminated at school, on the train, or anywhere else. Because then they start to see that this is not an issue of them. This is an issue of all of us as Black people, as Black bodies. And once you do that, then it opens up dialogue. It opens up a discussion. Do it with everyone. Also, practice hygiene with the language. When you start using terms that also delegitimize a Black body, then you're not really helping as well. And that's another phase that we have to work about, but that's also included. And language is important. Like I stated earlier, if you come out with somebody saying all Dominicans are racist, they're going to shut down. If you say there's racism in the Dominican culture and this is why, X, Y, and Z, then you open up a dialogue and a discussion.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for your time and for this wealth of knowledge that you've provided us today. Thank you. We really
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Franchesca, also for making this happen as well. All right.
Folks, to stay in touch with Edwin and check out conversations like the one that we had here today in a longer form, you can follow at La Sala Talks and at Spanish Voices. Open BXRx. We'll be right back.
Protests for George Floyd continue around the country and have called attention to other incidents of police brutality within the Black and brown communities. Residents of Washington Heights gathered to celebrate the life of George Floyd and to call for justice for Feliz, a man from the Bronx who was shot by police on October 17, 2019.
The officer discharges his weapon, one fatal shot to the chest, and my brother's life was lost. He was taken out of the vehicle pantsless and left in the middle of the streets for everyone in the world to see him.
According to his brother Sammy Feliz, 3 NYPD officers pulled Feliz over for a traffic stop. Once the cops found warrants on the identification he provided, they asked him to step out of the vehicle. After tasing him inside the car, Allen was fatally shot in the chest.
Put it in park! Put it in park! Put it in park! Yo! Should I call an 85? Put it in park! Put it in park, Eddie. If I have to shoot you, bro.
During a press briefing following the incident, NYPD Chief of Department Terrence Monahan stated that Feliz tried to flee in the vehicle after putting it first in drive and then in reverse.
It was after the car went into reverse that the sergeant fired one round from his service weapon, striking the male in the chest.
Feliz's brother questioned why the traffic stop ended in Feliz's death and called for police reform throughout the country to avoid other incidents like his brother's.
I believe that what happened with my brother, as well as what happened with George Floyd, just shows us as a community that the system is not only flawed here in New York, and it's not only flawed in Minnesota, it's flawed throughout the nation.
Throughout the protest, various residents spoke about the need for police reform in their community. Community organizer Claudia De La Cruz expressed the concerns of Washington Heights residents.
Most of the folks that are here today are here because we're frustrated, we're angry, and we're disgusted by the continuous and historic ways in which the police relates to community.
As we enter the trial phase of the officers involved in George Floyd's death, protesters continue to push for police reform and a fair trial in hopes that the facts of this incident will not be forgotten. Here are the facts. George Floyd was held down by an officer's knee to his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Even after George Floyd protested multiple times that he could not breathe, the officer did not remove his knee. As you can see here today, Allen Feliz's death and George Floyd's death are not isolated incidents of police brutality in the Black community. The 3 officers charged with aiding and abetting in George Floyd's death faced their first court appearance on June 4th. Officer Chauvin faces his first court appearance on June 8th. The officers involved in Allen Feliz's death have not been charged. Reporting for BronxNet, Jericho Tran.
Welcome back to Open BXRx. The Civilian Complaint Review Board is an independent oversight agency that investigates, mediates, and prosecutes complaints of NYPD misconduct. About 5 years ago, a group of community members introduced a campaign to replace the CCRB with an elected Civilian Review Board in order to put the community first, hold police accountable, and stop police violence. Joining us now to tell us more about the ECRB is Luis Tejada, community organizer. Thank you for joining us, Luis.
Hello. Hi, Sonyi. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Luis Tejada. I am a member of the Elected Civilian Review Board campaign, which has been an effort for the last 5 years in which coalition I myself belong to Freedom Socialist Party, which is one of many coalitions of in this movement of the campaign. And yes, we view that the Civilian Complaint Review Board is ineffective based on its years of existence. And especially at this time, we can see how with the Black Lives Matter movement, this issue about police brutality is alone, is very, has been going on for years. And that's why this group of activists during the Freddie Gray incident, we decided to think of something specific that can hold police officers accountable, and be control, community control of officers who parole our neighborhoods, and that officers should not be above the law, and the police commissioner should not have the final say of disciplining officers.
Right. And Luis, when we talk about what's happening under the current review board, what is happening that's not working, and why do we need an ECRB, especially right now through the civil unrest and COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you and everybody who's listening, right, I'm going to just portray you a statistic from 2017, 3 years ago, that is posted on, the Civilian Complaint Review Board posts their statistic yearly on a yearly basis, and this is from 2017. They received 4,487 complaints, which in my perspective, I'm sure is very low. 33% of those 4,487 complaints were investigated. 5% of those 33% that were investigated were only found valid. And ultimately, when the CCRB made the recommendations, 73% were disregarded by the police department. And at the end, in that year, 0% officers were fired as a result of those complaints. So that can just give you a picture of how ineffective, this impartial office, which is supposed to work impartial from the police to investigate civilians' complaint, has a record of not being effective in investigating other complaints. They truncate a majority of civilians' complaint, which is why I believe that in that year, in 2017, and from my experience in doing outreach in the South Bronx, in East New York, in Flatbush, throughout the city, people see the CCRB as a worthless institution that completely, devalues civilian complaints. And the main reason, right, is that the Civilian Complaint Review Board has no power, don't have no binding power after they give due process to the police officer and take all the findings. The board has no final determination of discipline. We have to be witness of police officers like Daniel Pantaleo, who had about 12 complaints to the CCRB, and ultimately we saw on video, how he choked Eric Garner to death, and and plus many other cases that we are now, the people have had enough, and we want real accountability and actual justice.
Right. And Luis, can you tell us the difference between an elected civilian review board versus the Civilian Complaint Review Board?
Yeah, one of the main difference, right, is the first tenant, which will be elected as opposed to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which receives 5 mayoral appointees, 4 city council appointees, and 3 police commissioners. The commissioner and the board, and the board, the executive board member select 3 board members. So essentially, all the members are appointed versus an ECRB members will be elected within their district. So the way we have done it, we have combined the legislative team of the campaign, 3 adjacent districts, to form, one board member constituency, right? So essentially, somebody, people in the community will be able to run for this board position. They have to collect 200 signatures in order to be put on the ballot, and it will be community discussion, community involvement. So that's one of the main difference. The second main difference is that we're calling for in the change to the charter as well, to have that reading in the charter that the police commissioner needs to, by law, follow through on the recommendations that were final after all the investigation by the elected board members. And similar as to the CCRB, you have 3 board members that ultimately write down, based on the evidence, write down the recommendations. The ECRB will also have 3 board members who will work, and after all the private investigation was done, will give now, as opposed to giving a recommendation, they will give their binding decision that the police commissioner needs to act. And if the 3 members, based on all the information that was gathered, decide to say this officer needs to be fired from the police force, by law, the police commissioner will need to follow through and remove the officer from the NYPD force. And thirdly, we also we know that police officers not only do misconduct, they also commit crimes. And some of those crimes are, as we know, murder as well, the most extreme, choking civilians to death. They should serve time in prison. And that's why we also call for a citywide elected independent special prosecutor who can file, who has it acts as a lawyer in New York State, in New York City, and can, separate from the district attorney, which has a very bad, also has a bad history of not holding officers accountable. We feel that also the city, people in New York City should elect an independent special prosecutor, in which will be working in conjunction with the ECRB, with the Elected Civilian Review Board members, to file criminal charges to, police officers that break the law.
Right. And Luis, I also wanted to highlight that the ECRB is looking to involve community members who have also been affected by any type of police brutality as well. Is that correct?
Yes, right. We feel that, the best people that can listen to the complaints, that can make sure that the communities are safe, that the communities are not wrongly surveilled and harassed by the NYPD. Clearly we saw the example with Black and Latino people getting majority of tickets during the COVID burst. There was definitely racism and bias by the NYPD, very clearly. And community people who know their community, who members can easily speak to them, have access to, should be the one, from the campaign's value, should be the one being elected and running for this board position. That's why we have, very importantly, we have made it key to organize within district and to pass this ECRB law to city council, because that's the out of the 3 options, the Charter Revision Commission, which we also participated, but didn't took on our legislation, and the city clerk, we feel that the city council strategy to pass, to put forward this amendment, in which then will allow all New York City voters to vote for it. And we are sure that if this legislation is put forward by city council, the majority of New York City will be behind it and will vote yes for it. And we know that there's going to be amazing people running for these positions throughout the city.
Luis, as I said earlier, it's been 5 years in the making. What are some of the challenges and the pushback or opposition to bring this to legislation?
Recent news, the police commissioner promised, he said, I promised I'm going to follow through on the CCRB recommendation. So, political people in politics, they just want to promise, right? They don't want to make laws. Before the current protests that have been going on for 16 days as of now, there was not a political will within city council to put some legislation like ours on the on the ballot, and there has been critiques about it and saying, oh, the police can take over this board, they have more money. Some political officials have made those type of comments. They also say, oh, the ECRB is working well. It just needs a little bit more reform. But clearly, not only in New York City, right, throughout, in Chicago, in South Carolina, in Florida, also our friends right here in Rochester, many cities are calling for, community control of the police in some, we're not saying in the ECRB campaign that we want to remove the power from the police commissioner to train police officers or to discipline, the police commissioner will have that power. We're just saying that once people make complaints and there's evidence that such police officer acted unnecessarily in that interaction with a civilian, and if there's evidence for it, the appropriate recommendations or discipline should be enforced. And I think there's a movement that we're gonna definitely push as well, besides defund the police, to also that we need to hold the police accountable, and we're gonna be able to fight those conservative forces in city council that don't necessarily want a empower board. They probably will be happy with having an elected board, but they won't want the empower or the elected independent special prosecutor. So we're just going to fight them with massive numbers of people organizing and calling out their city council members to not allow the PBA or any special interest to water down this bill when it becomes introduced.
Thank you, Luis. How can people learn more about the campaign and support and get behind it?
Right now, we have every second Saturday of the month, very accessible meetings via Zoom, which members can find if they go to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/HopePoliceAccountable. You can also follow us on Instagram.com/HopePoliceAccountable, or also follow our sign our petition on our website, which is stoppoliceviolence.nyc.org. And connect with us. We have a very large pool of volunteers, of campaign members that see this issue very important as a critical one, and families that have lost their sons, their daughters to police brutality. We have activists. So yes, join us and help us be the first city to have such a board with these three key tenets.
Thank you so much for your time today, Luis.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sonyi.
Again, folks, to find out more about the Elected Civilian Review Board, you can visit stoppoliceviolencenyc.org and follow them on Facebook and Instagram at Hold Police Accountable. Open BXRx will be right back.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people. Avoid crowds. Stay home if you can. Wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
Welcome back to Open BXRx. George Floyd's death sparked protests nationwide. Outcries and powerful signs demanded action and police reform. In response, Democrats recently unveiled a police reform bill gearing towards a shift in law enforcement. Joining us now to discuss the Change the NYPD campaign and #SaferNY Act bills and more is Anthonine Pierre, spokesperson for Communities United for Police Reform. Anthony, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The first thing I want to learn about is the Communities United for Police Reform. Can you just give us a little bit of background on CPR?
Yeah, absolutely. So Communities United for Police Reform is a citywide coalition of organizations that want to work together for police reform. So I'm the deputy director of the Brooklyn Movement Center, and the Brooklyn Movement Center is one of the organizations in CPR's coalition.
Thank you. And can you tell us about the problems with the current state of the NYPD in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. So even anybody who's been living in New York City in a pandemic knows all of the ways that social distancing has been disproportionately enforced in communities of color, and specifically for Black people. And then now, you know, the last couple of weeks, we've seen a ton of protests, right? People specifically protesting police violence, but then we've seen retaliatory police violence, both from people actually getting beat on the street to even the mayor instituting a curfew, right? Which is, it's hard to not feel like after a week of protesting that a curfew is not meant to sort of stop people from expressing their rights.
And what solutions does CPR propose for the city to approach these type of issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is huge win that we're hoping to be celebrating as soon as the governor signs the bill to repeal 50A. And 50A is what we call the police secrecy bill, right? So it's the law that actually shields police misconduct records from the public. So today in New York City, you cannot find the misconduct records of a police officer, but you can get them for a massage therapist, right? And another piece is that we're running a citywide campaign to defund the NYPD by $1 billion in the next fiscal year. Because, you know, if you want less abusive and discriminatory policing, you've got to put less money in the NYPD budget.
Right. And Anthony, this is coming from the Safer NY Act bills, right? So the Police Stat Act and the recent repeal of the 50A, which you just mentioned. What is the other act, the Police Stat Act, and what do they mean for New York State?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Police Stat Act is it's what we call a data reporting bill, right? So it's a bill that will require all of the municipalities in New York State to hold data about police stops, right? So if they stop people, they need to save data on where those stops were, who those people were, what the demographics were, so that we can start to understand, even outside of New York City, what does abusive and discriminatory policing look like?
Got it. And please tell us more about the demands to defund the police. When people say, you know, cut the NYPD budget and NYC budget justice, what are the proposed budget cuts and what would they mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. Most people don't know that the NYPD budget is $5.6 billion. And the NYPD budget is more than the combined budgets of the Department of Homeless Services, the Department of Youth and Community Development, Department of Health, and workforce investment all combined, right? So we're here to say, look, we're in a pandemic. Coming out of a pandemic, we're going to need money in those agencies and not so much in the NYPD. So when we say, you know, hashtag budget justice or defund the NYPD, we're not saying let's just get rid of the NYPD's budget. We're saying that some of that budget during a crisis needs to be reallocated to social services because our society needs services.
Right. Can we emphasize on that a little more, Anthony? Tell us about the importance of allocating this funding to underserved and over-policed Black and Brown communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when we talk about the policing that happens in our neighborhoods, that policing is happening instead of the social services, right? So your local police precinct is always going to have all the new anti-terrorism tools, right, that are really expensive. But are they always going to have community center? Are they always going to have some youth employment? Are they always going to have emergency food delivery? So, and when you're coming out of a pandemic, what we really are going to need is to take care of people so much more than we're going to need like anti-terrorism units.
Got it. And is CPR trying to lead in the states enacting these new bills and proposed acts? Is this not happening anywhere else yet?
Yeah, I mean, what's really great about repealing 50A is that we're actually one of the last states in the United States that has a police secrecy law. So, you know, when Governor Cuomo signs the bill to repeal 50A, it'll kind of be like New York State is catching up to the rest of the country, right? Which is not how we like to think of New York State, which makes it even that much more important for us to get rid of police secrecy.
Got it. And what is next for CPR? How can people join the cause, donate, stay in touch, all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Just hit change the NYPD.org on your computer or your cell phone, tablet, like however you go online.
One more thing, Anthony. So I know that as part of the Safer NY Act bills, there's one more accomplishment that CPR is trying to make. Which one is that? What act are you trying to make?
I'm so happy you brought that one up. So it's a special prosecutor bill. And if folks remember when Eric Garner was killed by police in 2014 in Staten Island, there was some issues with the jury, right? And it wasn't really clear if the district attorney in Staten Island was able to really give a fair trial because of the relationships that district attorneys have with local police. So the special prosecutor bill, we actually passed an executive order back in 2015. But the thing about executive orders is that any executive can undo them, right? Like Cuomo or anyone else could decide, let's just get rid of it. So it's important to have the special prosecutor bill because you can't just undo a bill as easily as an executive order. And we want to make sure that as far as going forward, that the Attorney General is established as a special prosecutor who will prosecute police in cases of killings of unarmed civilians, like what happened with Eric Garner in 2014.
Got it. Thank you, Anthonine. Another thing, I forgot to mention, there's also a Know Your Rights brochure that CPR has created. Can people access that on the website as well for free?
I'm not quite sure if we have the whole thing up on the website, but at the very least, you should be able to go on changethenypd.org and request it.
Anthony, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sonyi.
Of course. Folks, to stay up to date with Communities United for Police Reform, you can visit changethenypd.org, follow CPR on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at changethenypd, and text justice at 877-877 for updates via mobile. Open BXRx will be right back.
For the first time in history, New York City has canceled the World Pride Parade due to COVID-19. The mayor announced last month that the parade, along with all Pride events, were also canceled. But what does this mean for New Yorkers who look forward to the festivities each year? Ali Fazal, Senior Director of Marketing for HiBob, says that companies should celebrate Pride and give their employees an inclusive space.
Creating some sort of celebration or way for your employees to experience a little bit of light is really important. So it's also giving your employees the ability to give back, to offer services to the community, to help others. And I love that Pride encompasses all of that.
While many companies are still working remotely, Fazal says that they should provide their employees the resources needed to make it an inclusive workspace.
You can commit to non-monetary initiatives, like donating hours of your time towards helping different charities or different nonprofit groups.
Fazal says that companies should not ignore the current climate, but address it head on.
All you have to say in a moment like this is that you do believe that Black Lives Matter and that you do believe in equality for the LGBT community. Putting it out there and saying something is better than saying nothing.
Fazal explains that even donating your time to LGBTQ youth in the form of mentoring and helping them with their resumes could be beneficial for a lifetime. Reporting for BronxNet, Darissa White.
Welcome back to Open BXRx. Black women have historically had the highest maternal mortality rates in the United States. And while researchers from the CDC and National Center for Health Statistics do not have a clear explanation, they suspect a combination of institutional racism in society and the healthcare system. Black women are also less likely to have access to quality prenatal care. A collective of Bronx-based Black birth workers seeks to build solutions that protect and honor birthing people in the Bronx and their families. Joining us now are co-founders of BxRebirth, Nicole, Jean-Baptiste, Evelyn, Alvarez, and Carmen, Mojica. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, Sonyi.
Of course. The first thing I want to start off with is, of course, learning about the platform, BxRebirth. Can you give me a little background?
Yes, hi. So my name is Carmen. Really, long story short, we saw that there was a necessity in the Bronx around moms and families that were going without their essential needs like diapers, wipes, formula because of the lockdown. And so we first came together around that, but then we had realized very quickly that we had been working together towards similar goals around supporting families in birth and pregnancy and the postpartum. And so we thought everything just kind of coalesced for this to be the perfect time for us to become a collective, to be able to provide doula support or connect people to doulas, to be able to just start to work very intensely on maternal mortality and morbidity issues, and as well as health for Black mothers and also for other people of color.
Thank you, Carmen. Can you all tell me just a little bit about Black maternal mortality and how and why it disproportionately affects so many Black birthing people and babies, as to, you know, depending on your research or whatever you can give us, and a little bit of insight on that?
Well, the reason why it affects Black people disproportionately is just racism and weathering. So a combination of the racism that has been institutionalized through the medical system, through housing, public assistance, all the different systems that have that contribute to our well-being, and all the gatekeepers. And so what happens is that because of the beliefs that come with racism towards Black people, when it comes to maternal health, we are not listened to, we're not believed. People don't believe that we feel pain the same way. This list goes on. The other part is that because of racism and the conditions of this country, Black people specifically, our bodies are weathered, which means that we live an entire lifetime of stress and all of the things that come with that, poor access to food and nutritious food, not enough access to culturally sensitive healthcare. And so by the time we end up becoming pregnant, or we end up having any other reproductive needs, all of the things that we've gone through our body also show up, right? And so already our bodies don't have the opportunity to show up in the ability to withstand pregnancy. Like we think that pregnancy is just this thing that happens and then you give birth, but it can all actually be very stressful on a body that's has not been nourished and has been going under a lot of duress and stress in the United States of America.
Right, BxRebirth is doing this work in the Bronx in particular, a place that has already been impacted by other health outcomes and food insecurity as well. Just talk to me a little bit about the effects of this, as well as the impact of mortality rates when it comes to Bronx mothers in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we know as people who have either been living in the Bronx for a sustained period of time or have been born and raised here, like myself, is that we have often felt like the forgotten borough, right? And that happens even with maternal health care. So many people have looked at Brooklyn and, central Brooklyn as the hotspot for maternal mortality and morbidity, when the Bronx is not too far behind Brooklyn. If you look at, I don't have the statistics in front of me right now, but the same is true for infant mortality as well, and morbidity, right? So the fact that people are going into hospitals, planning to have their babies in the Bronx, and sometimes not making it out alive, or within a year, or many times less than that, they're not surviving. They're not alive to see their baby's first birthday. And in a lot of cases, the baby's not surviving and thriving up until their first birthday. So I think this points to just a conglomeration of things. We in the Bronx, we are the nation's poorest congressional district, right? What is poverty? What is it linked to? It's linked to food deserts. It's linked to lack of access to quality care. And all of these things are intertwined. And Carmen spoke really well to the fact that racism, by and large, is the reason why Black people are dying at 8 to 12 times the rate as white people in New York City, 4 to 5 times the rate as white people in the country. So I would say what we see and feel in the Bronx is a really prime example of what's happening on a national scale. You have this space where the majority of folks who inhabit it are Black folks and folks of color. And there's this huge crisis, yet it feels like it's not being addressed appropriately. How does that happen? Why is that happening? How has it been allowed to go on for so long?
Right. And can we also discuss the young Black woman from the Bronx, Amber Rose Isaac, who died during childbirth? I believe it was at Montefiore Hospital.
Right.
Can you tell us more about her case and what happened there?
Yeah, sure. And Evelyn can speak to this as well. She and I were featured in the article in the City, which spotlighted her case, I think, first. And what happened with Amber was, sadly, many of the details were just so familiar, and those included some of which Carmen mentioned already, stating to your provider that, hey, I don't think something's right, something feels wrong, or I'm pretty sure I need to come in today. A series of those incidents is what was occurring with Amber. And on top of that, to exacerbate things, you had COVID-19, a situation that really allowed for dismissal. Many providers were turning to telehealth. However, for someone like Amber, who was diagnosed with HELP syndrome, that is not a viable way to be treating someone. And her partner, Bruce McIntyre, who's still living, he can speak to the care that was not received and that they had expected to receive. By and large, what they were relaying was that they felt as though the providers that they were coming in contact with were incompetent. And I think that's a really sad commentary for someone who is preparing to bring in new life and who's looking forward to, this event.
Right, and as those of us who are familiar with the case know, Amber actually tweeted about it a couple of days before her death. So that was it was a sad, case all in all. And I feel like this is a conversation that people really don't have enough. The fact that Black mortality rates are as high as they are and have been as high as they are, and research still doesn't even tell us why, But I also want to talk about how BxRebirth has been helping Black mothers through COVID-19 with all the actions that you've taken and the donations that you're gathering and also giving into the community. Evelyn, can you talk about that, please?
Sure. We're really, we're really grateful that we've had a large number of donations, and people have been very generous to be able to enable us to turn this product to the community. So as of now, I think we're close to like 100 families that we've been able to donate diapers to in less than a month, right? And shout out to our volunteers that have taken their time and utilized their own resources to be able to donate. We're also right now in talks of really establishing a doula collective in the Bronx that will enable us to also be able to support families and to give them some of the information that they need to feel more empowered when they go into hospital spaces, and also answering questions. Carmen is a midwife. All three of us are doulas. And so we really come from that perspective of really being able to support our community in being able to not just receive access to diapers and clothing and formula, but also thinking about what are the things that we can really impact. So right now we're thinking about activism. We're acting on that. We're supporting agencies that are doing some of this work. We're doing direct donation to people. We are collecting and we're collaborating with other upcoming spaces in the borough that also get to support the belief that we have that people should have birthing options in the Bronx, and that we have to support parents as is, right? Which I think is a really important thing, that also racism and white supremacy and all those other good things act in ways that we have to think that we don't deserve it, or that we have to be optimal Black people in order to receive support. And I think that one of the things is like, you deserve support because you are.
Thank you so much. If anyone else wanted to chime in before we go, just with a few last words before I ask also about how to get connected with BxRebirth and all that good stuff. If you wanted to just give a couple more words on just, supporting the community and being there for the community during this time.
Yeah, well, one of our long-term visions is to establish more than one birth center in the borough. And very soon we'll be working on manifesting that vision.
Well, best of luck, and thank you all for your time today. Just before we go, how can people get connected with BxRebirth, whether they're mothers and families in need or would like to donate?
They can check out our website, bxrebirth.org. We're also on Instagram, so lots of information. They can also email us at bxrebirth@gmail.com.
Thank you all again for your time. Take care and be well.
Thank
you.
Folks, again, BxRebirth is currently accepting donations and directly aiding Bronx moms in need. To support and follow, you can visit them at BxRebirth on Instagram and visit bxrebirth.org for more information. That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning into BXRx. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and your family safety and wellness now and always. Until next time.